There is a chair sitting forgotten in a barn, in an attic, in a grandmother's parlor, right now, and the family sitting on it has no idea. A chair just like it once sold for $80,500 at a major auction house. I am Samuel Mast, and I am Amish, and where I come from, a chair was never something you bought to replace in 5 years. It was something a man built with his own 2 hands, sanded smooth over long winter evenings, and passed down to his children. That is the world I was raised in, and it is exactly why I can tell you, with complete certainty, that some of the most valuable rocking chairs in this country are sitting in homes right now, unnoticed, holding laundry or gathering dust. This is not a story about flashy antiques sealed behind museum glass. This is about the kind of chair that sat on a real porch. It rocked a real baby to sleep, creaked through decades of ordinary evenings. Before anyone stopped to ask what it might actually be worth, there was a woodworker, self-taught, who started out building furniture for his own home, simply because he could not afford to buy what he wanted. He failed many times before he got it right, the way any honest craftsman does when he refuses to cut corners. Word of his work spread the way it always does among people who value real craftsmanship. Slowly, through someone seeing a chair in another home. Eventually, his rocking chairs found their way into households far beyond where he began. Multiple sitting heads of state-owned chairs built by his hands. His work sits today inside one of the most respected art museums in the country, treated as serious craftsmanship worthy of preservation. And several years back, a single one of his rocking chairs, made of walnut and ebony, went up for auction. It sold for $80,500, setting a new record for that maker's work at auction. Sit with that number for a moment. Then think about every piece of old handmade furniture sitting in a relative's home that everyone assumed was just old, or just worn. But here is what separates the people who find these hidden fortunes. This same maker built thousands of chairs across his lifetime. They do not all fetch $80,000. Some sell for $12,000, some for $20,000, some in the high 30s. One rocker, with an upholstered back and seat, sold for nearly $27,000 at a well-known auction house. The value was never random. It depended on the wood, the year it was made, the condition, and whether anyone bothered to ask the right questions. And that is the mistake I want to warn you about. I have heard this story more times than I can count. A family clears out a home, sees an old rocking chair with worn arms, and hauls it straight to the dump, or sells it at a yard sale, never once turning it over to look for a maker's mark, never once wondering if the hands that built it were hands the world would remember. A rocking chair is not judged the way a painting is judged. It is judged by who built it, and how it survived the decades. That is why 2 chairs that look nearly identical can be worth $20 and $20,000 at the very same time. The only difference between them is whether someone knew what to look for before it was too late. Now let me take you further back, because Sam Maloof's story, as remarkable as it is only one branch of a much older tree, and if you want to understand what makes a handmade rocking chair valuable, you have to go back to a group of people who built furniture, not for beauty, not for status, but for pure, honest function, stripped of every ounce of excess. I am talking about the Shaker communities. Religious craftsmen who believed that every object in a home should serve God through its usefulness, that vanity in furniture was a kind of sin, and that a chair should be built so well it could last 200 years. This philosophy is not far from the one I was raised with, and it is exactly why Shaker furniture has become quietly valuable. A Shaker rocking chair does not look flashy. It has no carvings, no gilding, no decoration for decoration's sake. It has clean turned posts, a ladder back, a woven tape seat, and rockers shaped with such precision that the chair moves like it is breathing. One tall rocking chair built by shaker hands in the 1840s, made of cherry wood, sold at auction for $6,875. Another, an elder's tall rocking chair from the same era, retaining its original woven seat, sold for $3,125. These numbers might look small compared to a Maloof chair, but these are chairs built with none of the fame or presidential provenance. These are simply well-preserved, honestly built chairs from a community that valued craftsmanship as a form of worship. And here is the detail most people miss. Many shaker chairs were stamped or labeled directly on the chair itself, sometimes on the back slat, sometimes on the underside of a rocker, with a maker's mark identifying which community produced it and often a size number as well. If you ever come across an old rocking chair with faded lettering, do not sand it off, do not paint over it. That mark could be the single detail that turns a $20 yard sale chair into a $3,000 piece of craft history. I have heard this story so often. A family clears out a home, sees an old chair, and hauls it straight to the dump, never once turning it over to look for a mark, never wondering if the hands that built it were hands the world would remember. A rocking chair is not judged by looking pretty on a wall. It is judged by who built it and how it survived the decades. The only difference between $20 and $20,000 is whether someone knew what to look for before it was too late. There is another name you need to understand before we go any further. Because if Sam Maloof represents the modern era of handmade rocking chairs, and the shaker communities represent the disciplined religious era before him, then Gustav Stickley represents the bridge between the two. A man who took the idea of honest, unadorned furniture and built an entire movement around it at the turn of the 20th century. Stickley believed, much like the shaker craftsmen before him, that furniture should be simple, sturdy, and built to outlast the person who made it. He ran his own workshops, and every piece that left his shop carried a shop mark, a small branded stamp reading a phrase that translates, roughly, to "as I can." A quiet statement of humility from a man who refused to claim perfection even as he built some of the most respected furniture. His rocking chairs, when they carry that mark and come from his early workshop years, regularly exceed $3,000 at auction. And the earliest examples, built when his workshop was young and every chair received personal attention, are considered museum quality by collectors. Now here is where I need you to slow down and pay very close attention, because this is the part that separates someone who casually likes old furniture from someone who actually understands its value. A Stickley rocking chair without the shop mark, or with a mark that has been sanded away, worn off, or painted over across 100 years of use, loses an enormous portion of its value instantly. The wood might be identical. The craftsmanship might be identical. But without proof of who built it, a buyer has no way to verify what they are purchasing. This single detail, a small stamped mark the size of a coin, is often the entire difference between a chair worth $3,000 and a chair worth $30,000. I want you to think about that the next time you see an old wooden rocking chair with a worn, unreadable mark on the underside of the seat. Do not assume it is meaningless just because you cannot read it clearly. Take a photograph. Look closely under good light. Run your fingers across it if you have to. That faint impression could be the only thing standing between you and knowing you own something genuinely significant. And this is where I want to bring in something else, something people rarely think about when they picture rocking chairs' provenance, meaning the documented history of who owned a piece before it reached you. A rocking chair used inside a historically significant office, one connected to a former president of the United States, sold at auction for $50,000. Not because the chair itself was rare, but because of exactly whose hands rested on those arms and exactly which room it sat in during a defining chapter of American history. This tells you something crucial about how value actually works in this world. It is never just about the wood, and it is never just about who built it. It is also about where that chair sat, who used it, and whether that story can be proven with documents, photographs, or a verified paper trail. A chair with no story behind it, no matter how beautifully built, will always sell for less than an identical chair with a proven history attached to it. This is why, if you inherit an old rocking chair from a family member, you should never simply assume its history is unknowable. Ask questions while the people who remember are still alive to answer them. Where did this chair come from? Who bought it? Was it passed down, and from whom? Write it down, even if it seems unimportant at the time. Because that single page of family memory could someday be the difference between a chair worth $200 and one worth $20,000. Now, I want to bring this all the way back down to something practical. Because knowing these stories means nothing if you cannot recognize the truth. Most people make the mistake that costs them everything. The first thing you need to examine on any old rocking chair is the joinery. A handmade chair built the traditional way uses wooden dowels, mortise and tenon joints, or hand-forged nails and bolts. If you look closely at where the arms meet the frame, you should see clean, tight, deliberate work. Not sloppy gaps filled with modern glue. A machine-made chair from a factory will have identical, repeated cuts across every joint, because a machine does not vary. A handmade chair will show small, human imperfections and tiny variations. Because no two cuts made by a human hand are ever perfectly identical. Strangely enough, those small imperfections are exactly what collectors are looking for. Because they prove a real person built that chair rather than an assembly line. The second thing you need to check is the wood itself. Learn to recognize walnut, cherry, maple, and ash by their grain patterns. Tend to command significantly higher prices than plainer, lighter woods. The third thing is turning the chair completely upside down and examining every square inch of the underside and the inside of the rockers. Look for stamps, brands, paper labels, or pencil markings. The most valuable information is almost never visible from where you normally sit. It is hidden underneath, pressed into wood that nobody bothers to examine because nobody was ever taught to look there. The fourth thing is condition. The instinct with old furniture is always to clean it up, refinish it, and sand away the wear. Do not do this. Original finish, even when it looks worn or slightly damaged, is worth dramatically more to a serious collector than a chair that has been refinished. Refinishing destroys the evidence of age and originality that collectors are paying for. A fresh coat of varnish makes buyers suspicious. The final thing that ties every lesson together is patience before action. If you find an old chair in a barn, do not immediately clean it. Photograph it from every angle, including the underside. Research any marks you find. Ask older relatives what they remember before that knowledge disappears. A chair that sat quietly for 50 years can afford to wait a few more weeks while you find out exactly what you are holding. That patience is what separates the families who discover real value from those who hauled it to the dump without ever knowing what they let go. I want to leave you with something I think about often, something that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the reason. These old chairs matter in the first place. Every rocking chair we have talked about today started the same way, as a plain piece of wood, shaped slowly by a pair of hands that cared enough to get every joint right, every curve smooth, every rocker balanced so it would move. The same way on the day it was finished as it would 50 years later. Nobody who built these chairs was thinking about auction records. or collector value. They were thinking about a mother who needed somewhere comfortable to sit while she held a newborn through a long night. They were thinking about a grandfather who wanted somewhere quiet to sit at the end of a long day of work. The value we have discussed today, the $80,000, the $3,000, the $50,000 tied to a piece of history, all of that came later, added on by people who understood what real craftsmanship looks like once it survives long enough to become rare. But the chair itself was never built for that reason. And I think that is exactly why these pieces hold up the way they do, generation after generation. While cheaply made furniture falls apart and gets thrown away within a few years of being bought, a chair built with patience and honest hands simply lasts, and lasting long enough is often the first quiet step toward becoming valuable. So before you assume that old rocking chair in the corner of your home is just an old rocking chair, take the time to actually look at it the way we discussed today. Turn it over, look for a mark, ask your oldest relatives what they remember. Notice the joinery, the wood, the small human imperfections that prove real hands built it rather than a machine. You may find nothing more than a comfortable, well-built chair, and that alone is worth appreciating in a world full of furniture built to be replaced rather than kept. Or you may find that the chair sitting quietly in your family for decades, the one everyone walked past without a second thought, is worth far more than anyone ever imagined, simply because someone finally took the time to look closely enough to notice what was there all along. That is the lesson worth carrying with you long after this video ends, and it is exactly why I will keep bringing you stories like this one, because somewhere out there, in a barn or an attic or a quiet parlor, another one of these chairs is still waiting to be found.